is Real Talk, the Customer Insights Show with Jenn Vogel. Join Jenn and her guests for this live discussion around topics that will help you understand your customers better. Also available on podcast channels. This live stream is presented to you by Voxpopme, the leader in video research. Here's today's live conversation.
Hello, insights professionals, marketers, and everyone who wants to understand their customers better. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Real Talk, the Customer Insights Show. We are live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and the podcast version will be available on your favorite podcast channel soon. Today, I'm excited to dive once again into the topic of customer experience management and how to turn customer feedback into insights and then actual action. On today's episode, I'm joined by Ross Wainwright, the CEO at Alida. Alida is one of our trusted integration partners, and I'm looking forward to diving into this topic with him. As Alida's leader, Ross believes in a world where the best business decisions are those made with customers, not for them. He has aligned his global team to help companies uncover and action their customers' truth to improve experiences and create meaningful relationships. Welcome to Real Talk, Ross.
Well, good afternoon, Jen. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, really great to have you today. Excited to dive into this conversation. And before we get into the topic, I have a question that I ask all of our guests that join on the show. And from your experience, how has the role of customer insights evolved in companies in the last couple of years?
Well, it's interesting, from an academic perspective, pre-pandemic, customer experience and understanding the hearts and minds of your customers was a top 10 initiative for CEOs and CXOs. Today, post-pandemic, or maybe current pandemic, depending on what part of the world you sit in, customer experience management and understanding the hearts and minds of your customers is one of the top 2 initiatives. It is so important to understand what they're thinking, because you got to get it right the first time. And everything's changed, right? The world has changed, and it's not necessarily going to go back to where we were. So you got to be listening in order to get it right.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, some of our other guests on the show have, answered that question by saying, it hasn't changed, right? Like the fundamentals are still there. You still, the processes are the same, or the methodologies that you're using are the same, but what you're saying about the priority shifting, this is now the top initiative for companies to understand where consumers are at. Like, totally agree. That's really risen in the ranks over the last year, for sure.
Yeah, no, it's we talk about just understanding the hearts and minds of your customers and leading with empathy. I think is really, I think the world candidly needs more empathy. I think software companies definitely need more empathy, right? And if we really put ourselves in the shoes of our clients and understand what they're going through, and we listen and they listen to their customers, then you know what? We can drive impact. We can make a huge difference in driving a business outcome. And that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And I think that increase in empathy that you've talked about has been a big topic over the last year. And honestly, something that people were like, shouldn't we have been doing this all along? Shouldn't we have had that level of empathy all along? But I think it is a really positive byproduct of the challenging year that we've had, that everyone seems to have a little bit more empathy internally in their businesses, for their customers, for each other. And that's a real benefit going forward.
For sure.
So maybe could you tell us just a little bit about Alida and what led you to join the company?
Well, first of all, I believe in the space. It's a massive TAM. Like the total addressable market is, 40 billion, 30 billion, depending on who you speak to. It's a massive, massive space, and it's growing. The CAGR, so the compounded growth rate, is somewhere around 23-24%. And I think this is the next big horizon. Just like ERP and CRM, supply chain over the years, certainly the advent of social media. This is a massive space, and I think it's early days. I think that there is consolidation. I think there's a lot of innovation still to be harvested. And Alida, formerly Vision Critical, for 20 years was in the business of basically harvesting truth, right? We would go and talk to our customers and understand what was on their minds. What Alida does is now putting it into action, and this, I think, is the next battleground for the emerging customer experience space. It's how do you put it into action? Because if you don't put it into action, how do you possibly drive value for the client? So I'm 15 months as the CEO for Alida. We rebranded our company back in September. Alida it's a Latin word. It's a heroine, and Alida it means truth or verity, which we think falls very nicely into one of our values, which is around empathy. And our tagline is we want to put truth into action. We want to drive closed loop. And we think that's a really strong competitive advantage for our company. And I think, candidly, I think our customers are really looking for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to dig into that topic of action. And just a little side note, I didn't realize we had that in common. Our companies, our Voxpopme is based on the Latin Vox Populi, which means voice of the people. And we've got a little Latin heritage going on between the two companies, which is fun.
I love it. I'll have to talk to David about that. I had no idea. That's very cool.
Yeah, there you go. So, you have talked about believing in partnering with customers. Maybe tell us a little bit about that, and when you realize that companies need help with that concept of partnering with their customers.
Well, listen, I think, first of all, there's a lot of companies that are in the CX space. I think according to Gartner, I don't know, several thousand, depending on how you measure it. So everybody's kind of jumped into the space. But I think how we really evaluate the impact we can provide for our customers is based on the outcome. It's all about the business outcomes we can drive for our clients. And that, candidly, that's what senior executives that I speak to are looking for every day. They're looking for competitive advantage. They're looking for the lowest possible TCO, so total cost of ownership. They want time to insight, time to value. They want the data necessary to drive an outcome. And I think this is the new battleground, right? It's how do we provide what we call a closed loop that can go and drive business value to really help, an outcome to serve shareholders, because that's ultimately who we're accountable to. Yeah,
totally. And I think, I've had these conversations with other people, because as you say, there's a lot of companies in the CX space. Everybody's trying to help their customers work towards that same goal of an outcome, whatever that is, whatever they're measuring. But I think what we've seen is that brands tend to have more of a, there's no measurement issue, right? There's plenty of surveys and different ways people are collecting feedback and data passively and proactively. We have an action problem. How that data is used is really the challenge. So, to be, you guys at Alida are really trying to drive that action. How are you combating that challenge with just the industry in general of companies getting all this information, not knowing what to do with it?
So, a terrific question. Let me provide a customer example for context, if I may. So, we have 620 clients globally. We play in 5 verticals. So, we play in CPG and retail, financial services, healthcare in the United States. We play in retail and CPG and financial services. And one of our clients, we also play in the automotive space. Toyota is a client in the UK. And they were using a technology for surveys. They were using it for net promoter score. So how are you going to score the service or some type of experience? And the responses they were getting from the survey were actually kind of low. So the question was, what is your experience when you pick up your new car? Now, you would think when you pick up a new car, the car smell and it's brand new, you feel great. But they were getting the actual opposite. They were getting 4s and 5s out of 10. So they couldn't close loop. They could not find out the answer to the why on the back of those poor scores. So they said, let's go and talk to the insight community, the deep insight that's provided in this case by Alida. And they asked the same question to 30,000 people that are advocates that have been with Toyota for many years, multiple vehicles. And they answered the question. They said, well, we feel anxious, right? We've got salespeople that are trying to sell us more products or more features. We're sitting in the middle of the showroom. We feel exposed. We don't feel comfortable asking the dumb questions about, Apple CarPlay and all that sort of thing. So as a result, they changed their business model and they created a customer success CSM type of engagement. They created a separate part of the dealership for the handoff. And guess what? The net promoter scores went up. And more importantly, the customers came back and said, I do want to buy the truck liner, or I want to go and buy the maintenance contract. But the message here is surveys without closed loop does more harm than good. You have to have a closed loop. You have to, whether it's a point of sale survey, regardless of how a customer is engaging with your client, you have to understand either why the score has been great or why the score is really poor, so that you can then go back to that client to either fix the problem, thank them, celebrate, or ask the follow-on question. And so I think that's one of the gaps in our industry, right? It's a lack of simplicity around closed loop. And we partner with many different companies. Partners are very important. And the various different areas of feedback are really important. Voxpopme is a great example. They are our partner for video feedback and video sentiment analysis. But there's so many different sources of data that text analytics, video analytics, surveys, net promoter score, voice of customer, voice of employee. But all of this data, like, how do you make sense of it, right? How do you aggregate it? How do you simplify it? And how do you make it consumable for your customer? That's a big challenge in the industry.
Yeah, for sure. And this goes really fits in well with what you were saying before about empathy, right? Because all that data, the numbers, the trend lines, and the scores, that's not empathy. That's not a connection with your customer and really understanding what they're experiencing, what they're feeling, what they're thinking during that time when they're picking up that car. For a lot of people, the biggest purchase they're going to make in, 10 years or something like that. Like, going that next level, that next layer to really understand what you're going through in your life, how is this making you feel? That's that missing empathy that really, when you get that piece, you're able to take action that actually improves the experience.
It's actually it's a terrific use case, I think, for the video sentiment analysis space in CX. You pick up your car, you have an immediate reaction, right? Capture it, right? 10-second, 15-second video, go back and tell exactly what that experience is and how could it be even better at the end of the day. And that's what Toyota did. And what's interesting for me is the disparity of sources is really important, because there are different ways that you can then triangulate the information to serve your client. The problem is that they sit on so many different platforms: marketing, loyalty, product, UI. These are all different parts of the organization that are aggregating data around customer experience. And I've had a number of CEOs recently saying, we need to simplify it. I need to standardize. The disparity is important. All of these different heterogeneous sources of data. But please provide me one single, united, integrated platform to consolidate the information, to package it up so it's C-suite consumable, and bring it back so we can then put it to work at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, that has been a challenge that has been emerging with insights, with customer experience over the last 10 years or so, where just there's more and more and more data available, and getting it, merging it together so you can understand how, shopping behavior and purchase information is matching up with experience feedback and things like bringing that all together is such a huge challenge. And we're not getting any less data. We're just getting more and more. Sure. So we're starting to see, platforms that are focusing on marketplace and really bringing everything into one place. I see so many companies building their own DMPs. It's so important to get that all in one place. And not only that, but we've had some other guests on the show really talk about the importance of data transparency, because, you know, the challenge that you're talking about is like, oh, you've got these marketing teams and customer experience sharing this data, but it's in different, like, that's almost the best case scenario that they're sharing it, right? So a lot of times they're not even sharing it, let alone, you know, actually merging it together in one platform. So that's a huge challenge that is a big undertaking for a lot of companies to try to solve for.
You know, it's a terrific point, Jen. And I was chatting with some senior executives working for one of the top digital marketplaces in the industry and in the cloud space. And their message is the complexity actually impacts time to value, or what we refer to as time to insight. And as a result, you know, time is money. It impacts the new product introduction. It impacts the time to which a client can understand when a client could potentially, one of their customers could churn, right? Because you've got all these different sources of data. Because of the complexity, it actually is impacting the time of which it takes for a client to understand what their customers are thinking and feeling. And that's a huge risk at the end of the day, especially coming, I think, out of the pandemic. I think we need to be prescriptive, and we got to get it right the first time. There's not a lot of room for error right now. There's not a lot of patience. And so whether it's missing the mark or taking too long to pull that together, that's driving a big part of this kind of consolidate the data onto one framework, onto one platform, and leverage all of the, you know, the heterogeneous data points, but simplify it. That's a big part of it.
Yeah. And that point about the speed, I mean, like we were saying before, things are changing so rapidly. So if you don't act on something really quickly, there's probably a new thing that's emerged in the meantime that you don't even know about yet because it's taking you too long to evaluate that insight.
Yeah, no, I think you've nailed it. The other piece is cost. These systems are getting so complicated, right? If you can't get a program up and running within 30 days, if you've got to spend 2, 3, 4x the software investment through consulting partners to go get it up and running, then maybe you got the wrong product, or maybe you got the wrong technology. We've got to find a way to provide speed and the lowest possible cost of ownership. And part of that, for me, I think is the type of technology platform. It's got to be a true cloud native product. There's a lot of technology that's kind of been, you know, kind of repackaged as a traditional on-premise software that's now being bundled into a cloud offering, but it's not a true native cloud. It's not what we call multi-tenant. The analogy I use is that when you're upgrading your operating system on your phone, it just happens, right? You don't plan for it. You don't go and spend money or call your provider to go plan for your upgrade, right? It just sort of happens. And that's the power of a multi-tenant cloud offering. And we think that's an important differentiator in the industry as well.
Yeah. Gone are the days of pulling out the Windows 97 CD-ROM and loading it into your PC, right?
There you go. There you go. Yep, I'm with you. You know, there's another interesting differentiator too that I wanted to share with you that I think is important. So surveys have been mostly commoditized in this space. And surveys offer broad feedback. You can have millions and millions of, in our company, we have 25 different survey types. We have anywhere from 100 to 150,000 surveys a day and over 164 million people that are actively on our platform per year. On a global basis, 25 languages around the world as well. But the flip side of that, what we call broad feedback, is the deep insight. This is that profiled client. This is the client that's on their third Toyota product. They've been with Toyota for 10 years. They're on the community site all the time. They're providing their insights. When you bring those two together, what we call the deep insight through an insight community plus the broad feedback, when you tie the two together, that's when the magic happens on one solid integrated platform, right? That is a true cloud native architecture. We think that's a very powerful play, just like the Toyota example where the survey came from one part of the business, but they used their insight community to go test the waters. Very powerful.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, there's a lot of debate about like what type of feedback is the best or what methodology is the best. And I'm a big
I think
believer.
you froze, Jen. You froze there for a minute.
Am I back? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Say something.
I hope I'm back. The excitement of being live. But I was just saying, there's a lot of debate often about, which methodology is best or which survey type or this, that, and the other. And I think like it's so important to be able to use those different methodologies and different techniques together because they're all good for kind of a different purpose. And so, you've got a lot of different ways that your customers can capture feedback. And I love that, the broad feedback and the deep feedback and how that kind of works together. And, obviously we're talking now about technology. We talked last week on the show or a couple of weeks ago about technology assessment. How can technology actually help those customer experience and insight professionals actually take that action that we were talking about? Because the collection is the easy part, right? So how can the technology actually help them to drive change?
So this, a terrific question. So this same example that I shared with you, this large global digital cloud provider, they have data coming from video, from text, from voice of customer, voice of employee, from net promoter score, from surveys, of course, different languages, different theaters, different cultures. All of that disparity is really important, but it's how do you simplify it? How do you aggregate it? And our job is through the power of our Alida platform, through the power of our AI strategy, how do we want to package it up through a dashboard and through the analytics so it's consumable to the executive and the executives can go and put it to work. How they put it to work, I think ultimately is up to our clients. And we work with partners that will provide market research and we can do a couple things. We can bring partners in to do market research. We have services that will provide what we call managed services for survey creation. That's one of the long poles in the tent, or what we refer to as managed services for managing the platform. So we can help them run the technology and create the surveys, but the actual aggregation, after we package it up, how it's actually implemented into the business, if we've done our job, the customer will know their business. They will know how to leverage that data. And if they need market research help, we have partners that can provide that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I find interesting, I've seen a lot of different brands, kind of on the full spectrum of, capturing and doing nothing and capturing and really being, the ones that everyone should look up to in terms of, actually actioning the feedback that they're getting. And one of the differences I've seen is actually, you mentioned earlier, like customer experience is still kind of a new discipline in a lot of these companies. I think everybody's always been doing it in some way, shape, or form, but it's really been, it's being operationalized differently today. And I see it rolling up into different departments in all different organizations. So sometimes it rolls into marketing, sometimes it rolls into operations. I've seen customer experience sit underneath the training programs in companies or directly reporting into the CEO. What have you seen in terms of the brands that you work with and where customer experience fits that maybe it's implemented the best or the most in the most kind of impactful way?
Well, I'll give you a couple, maybe two quick examples. One is Red Bull. So Red Bull is in the energy sport drink market, right? That market has been, it's a very competitive space. And they were planning their next competitive drink that they wanted to take to market. So they thought, well, let's go back to our target demographic, right? 18 to 35-year-old male, athletic, ski boarder or a skier or a surfer, like that kind of demographic. But before they did it, the CEO said, why don't you go and talk to the insight community folks with Alida, because they've got 40,000 people that actually will provide feedback that are super passionate about Red Bull. And what they learned was very interesting. It wasn't about the next drink for that male demographic, athletic type background. The message that came back was it was moms between the ages of 35 and 45 that might have 3 or 4 Red Bulls just to get through their day, right? And that was a very different perspective. And as a result, they took the two, if you know the branding, the bowls and all of the great packaging that Red Bull does, they added a softer, a slightly different, aesthetic to their marketing strategy. And they launched this Red Bull product specifically for that demographic, one of the fastest products, the most successful product launches in their company history. So that's a great example that if you listen to your customer, they'll tell you what they want at the end of the day. The other example I'll give you is a customer up here in Canada called Canadian Tire. And Canadian Tire, they would compete with a Home Depot or one of those type of providers. Hopefully you can still hear me. I think it looks like my video may have frozen there. Jen, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're all good. Loud and clear.
Looks like we lost him there.
Oh, did we? I wasn't sure if that was me. All right. Well, I think we might have had some technical difficulties there with Ross, but this has been a great episode. We might have to schedule a follow-up for this conversation because I still had a bunch of questions to ask. But if you can hear me out there, Ross, thank you so much for joining us today. Please rate and review us on your favorite network. Don't forget to share the show with your friends. On next week, I'm very excited to be joined by Rand Fishkin of Spark